What would you do if the very people who erased you invited you back without even realizing it? I hadn't stepped foot in Charleston in 9 years, not since the night I was thrown out with nothing but a suitcase, a busted cell phone, and a name I wasn't allowed to speak again. My own. Now, I was walking through the golden-arched entrance of the High Wind Country Club, the same one my mother used to joke was too elegant for the likes of us, back when we were pretending to be humble. My heels clicked against polished marble as crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead like they were mocking me. Every corner smelled of old money and new lies. I wasn't on the guest list. I knew that before I ever booked my flight. They had erased me from everything: birthdays, holidays, family photos. I didn't exist to them anymore. But I wasn't here to be welcomed. I was here because my little sister, Emily Sullivan, was getting married, and I wanted to see how far she'd climbed on the ruins of my silence. I wore black. Not the soft, understated black of mourning, but a sharp, clean, velvet black dress with a slit high enough to make people whisper, and a neckline that reminded them I was no longer the girl they used to manipulate. My makeup? Immaculate. My eyes? Steel. The first person to recognize me was Aunt Diane. She dropped her champagne flute. It shattered, fitting. "Karen," she whispered, like the name itself had power. I smiled at her, the kind that held teeth. A hush fell across the reception hall like someone had pulled the fire alarm. Heads turned, forks froze midair. Then, like she'd summoned me with her guilt, my mother, Valerie Sullivan, emerged from the crowd. Her hair was pinned perfectly. Her pearls were the real kind. She looked like a Southern debutante, still pretending she hadn't sold her soul for status. Her expression faltered the moment our eyes met, but she composed herself within seconds. "Why are you here?" she asked. Her voice clipped like she was talking to a wedding crasher and not her firstborn daughter. I tilted my head, pretending to admire the floral arrangements. White roses, peonies, orchids. Emily always wanted what she didn't deserve. "I got an invitation," I said, sipping my champagne. "It was addressed to me. Strange, right? Considering you had me removed from every family record like I never existed." That's when I saw Emily. She came down the staircase like a pageant queen. Her dress was custom, silk and lace with a sweetheart neckline, a train flowing behind her like a river of purity. She looked every bit the part of the perfect bride. Until she saw me. Our eyes locked. Something flickered behind her lashes. Fear? Rage? Or just a surprise that the ghost of her past had materialized in the middle of her fairy tale? "Karen," she said, and even now, even here, she couldn't keep the condescension out of her voice. "You're not supposed to be here." I smiled, wider now. "You're right. I'm not." And then I turned away, slowly scanning the crowd. The guests, the press, the groom's political family who didn't know they were about to become part of a scandal so deep it would take months to scrub clean. "I'm not here for you," I said, voice low enough for the bride and my mother to hear. "I'm here for the truth, and I'm going to make sure everyone hears it." The music shifted. The string quartet awkwardly resumed. Conversations resumed, but the tension didn't fade. That was the point because no one knew what I would do next. They thought they buried me. But I came back in heels sharper than the knives they stabbed me with. And I was ready to return everything they'd given me. Doubled. They say time heals all wounds. That's a lie made up by people who never had to bleed alone. After I left the country club that night, before the storm I'd promised had even started, I drove back to the motel where I'd first laid my head 9 years ago. Room 107. The wallpaper was still peeling. The vending machine still stole your dollar half the time. But to me, it was holy ground. That was where it all began. I was 18 when my parents kicked me out. Not with anger, not even with loud voices. No, it was worse than that. It was quiet, calculated, cold. My mother handed me a packed suitcase and said, "You made your choice, Karen." My father didn't even look up from his laptop. My choice? Telling the truth. Emily had lied. Again. That time, it was about a teacher at school who accused him of something awful to cover for her cheating. And when it spiraled out of control, When the poor man's career was on the line, they told me to back her story. I couldn't. I wouldn't. So they erased me. No car, no college fund, no, we'll figure this out. Just a rainy porch and a door that clicked shut behind me. I spent the first week sleeping in a diner booth just outside Atlanta, ordering 1 cup of coffee every few hours so they wouldn't throw me out. The waitress there, Brenda, must have known what was going on. She brought me free toast, let me wash dishes in exchange for cash under the table. Eventually, she let me sleep in the office when the manager wasn't around. Brenda had a scar down her cheek and a past she never talked about. But she gave me a chance when my own family wouldn't glance at me. And when you've got nothing, even a little kindness feels like salvation. I spent 2 years in that diner, working nights, saving tips in a box I kept duct-taped under a loose floorboard in Brenda's office. Every night I'd wipe down greasy counters and repeat the same mantra, "You are not gone, you are becoming." I found an old Chromebook on clearance and used the diner's spotty Wi-Fi to take online classes, nutrition, business, chemistry. I wanted something of my own, something that couldn't be stolen or twisted or thrown out the way I had been. But the worst part wasn't the hunger or the cold or even the shame. It was the silence. No one called, no one checked in, not even Emily, not even on my birthday. They pretended I had died, and in a way I had. But the girl they buried? She didn't stay dead. She learned how to build a new life with her bare hands. By 21, I'd moved to Austin, Texas, with enough saved to rent a studio the size of a closet and file the paperwork for my own business, Sullivan Wellness Co. The name was the first knife I turned in the lock, using the family name they tried to strip from me. It was my way of saying, you can't erase what I reclaim. I started small. Instagram posts, cheap protein shakes, budget meal plans for single moms. Then TikTok found me. And suddenly, I wasn't just surviving, I was growing. I got a grant from a nonprofit focused on urban nutrition, then an investor, then a second. By 25, my company was valued at over $30 million. People called it a miracle. I called it penance. Every sleepless night, every burned fingertip, every moment of doubt, I paid in full. But nothing prepared me for what I found next. I'd applied for a business loan and been denied for discrepancies in my tax records. At first, I thought it was a glitch, but when I pulled my file, it was all there. Dozens of strange entries. Clinics I'd never visited. W-2s from hospitals in states I hadn't lived in. My social security number had been used and stolen. At the top of the list? Sullivan Family Medical Clinic, back in Charleston, my father's clinic, the same one he used to call our legacy. He had used my name, my number, to cover up fraudulent billing, Medicaid scams, ghost employees. It had been going on for years, and it was about to be exposed. I didn't cry. Not even then would I do it. I just stared at the screen, my own stolen identity glaring back at me. My past hadn't just been forgotten, it had been looted, weaponized. And the people who did it still walked free, still smiled in family portraits like nothing ever happened. So I hired an attorney, I brought on a digital forensic specialist. I filed for access to everything under my stolen credentials. I didn't scream, I didn't threaten, I just made a plan. Because revenge isn't loud, it's patient. And mine had waited long enough. Some people chase closure. I never did. Closure was a lie sold by therapists and talk shows, a fancy bow you're supposed to tie around something rotten. I didn't want closure. I wanted the truth, exposure, justice, and maybe, if I was being honest, just a little bit of destruction. But first, I needed to become untouchable. You can't destroy people who still have power over you. That's rule number 1. I wasn't going to throw a rock at a glass house unless I had a fortress of my own. And so I kept building. While the legal wheels turned, I played the long game. I expanded Sullivan Wellness into a national brand. We launched supplements, hired a full-time PR team, and opened physical locations. Every news article that ran my name was another nail in the coffin of the lie they built about me. But the irony? They still didn't know. Not my father, not Emily, not my mother. To them, I was a ghost who had vanished into nothing. They were too self-absorbed to notice the woman in the headlines sharing their last name. too proud to think the daughter they disowned could become something more than a footnote. It was almost insulting how easy it was to stay hidden in plain sight. My real opportunity came when I was invited to speak at a women in wellness conference in Charleston, the same city they lived in, dined in, and cheated in. I walked that stage like I owned it. My face was on banners, my voice echoed across convention speakers, and still, no one from the family showed. Not even Emily, who once swore she wanted to be just like me. She meant the version they could control. After the conference, I visited the law office I'd hired months prior. They handed me the final report, conclusive evidence of fraud dating back nearly a decade. Multiple employees were implicated. False signatures, mine, over and over. With one more forged document, they would have been able to claim me as a silent partner. They didn't just forget me, they profited from me, and it all connected back to the wedding. You see, the Sullivan name weighted Charleston. Reputation, legacy, and whispers of politics are in the air. Emily's fiancé, Brandon Reynolds, was from one of those families. Old money. His father sat on the state ethics board. The wedding wasn't just a celebration, it was a transaction. 2 names, 1 future, and a perfect lie standing at the altar. So I waited until the date was set. I watched as invitations went out, photos were posted, and champagne tastings were documented on Instagram. Then, I made a decision that would set everything into motion. I bought a house in Charleston, quietly, cash, 5 blocks from the old Sullivan estate. I began appearing in the places they loved to haunt, the organic markets, the equestrian charity events, the galas where cameras were always flashing. Sometimes I wore sunglasses. Sometimes I didn't. Still, they didn't notice. Because the truth is, people only see what they're ready to face. And my family had spent years pretending I didn't exist. Their denial was my camouflage. But beneath the surface, I was moving pieces. I rebranded my legal documents under my full name, Karen Evelyn Sullivan. I made sure it was public. I made sure it reached the right inboxes. And then, I leaked just enough information to stir curiosity without pointing fingers. A whisper here. A curious journalist there. I didn't need to shout, I just needed to flick the first domino. Because the wedding wasn't going to be a reunion, it was going to be the reckoning. Weddings are supposed to be sacred. A beginning. A promise. But for me, Emily's wedding wasn't a celebration, it was a stage, and I was done waiting in the wings. The week before the ceremony, I sat in my car outside the Sullivan estate. It looked the same. Columns like ivory fangs. Hedges trimmed with surgical precision, the American flag always flying just a little higher than it needed to. It was a house built on image, on silence, on secrets. But I wasn't a secret anymore. On the day of the wedding, Charleston shimmered with southern spring charm. The venue was a sprawling garden estate just outside town, the kind that looked plucked from a movie set. Arched gates, flowering dogwoods, a white gazebo at the center like a crown. Guests arrived in pastel silk and designer heels. The champagne flowed. Laughter danced over string quartets. To them, it was perfection. To me, it was the final act. I didn't crash it. Not really. My name was on the guest list. Not by mistake. A week earlier, I'd called the event coordinator, pretending to be one of the bride's cousins. I told her I hadn't received my invite. She was apologetic, flustered, and said it must have been a mailing error. I gave her my name, full and clear. Karen Evelyn Sullivan. She added it. Just like that, no one checked. Because in their minds, I didn't exist. I arrived in the Navy, not black, too obvious, not red, too desperate. Navy was power, grace, quiet control. My heels tapped against the stone path as I passed servers, photographers, and guests who had no idea what was coming. The ceremony hadn't started yet. I found my seat near the back, where the press wouldn't catch me but the family would. And then, I waited. The music began. Brandon stood at the altar, smiling that perfect, camera-ready smile. Emily appeared at the top of the aisle in a cloud of lace and white illusion. Her train dragged like a veil of lies behind her. Her smile was flawless. Her makeup was unbothered, until she saw me, one step, two, and then her gaze locked onto mine. She faltered, just slightly, a stutter step. Only someone who knew her well would have noticed, but it was enough. I smiled. She recovered quickly. She always was a fast liar. The ceremony went on. Vows were exchanged. Applause erupted as they kissed. But I wasn't clapping. I was watching my mother. Valerie sat 3 rows from the front, pearl earrings glittering beneath her hat. Her posture was perfect. Her smile was frozen. She hadn't seen me yet. Until the reception. I waited until they were all gathered in the grand tent. Guests sipping cocktails, the newlyweds taking photos, laughter echoing like nothing could touch them. Then I made my move. I stepped onto the small side stage where the band had just finished a set. I took the microphone. Calm, measured. "Hi, everyone," I said, smiling like I belonged. "My name is Karen Sullivan. I used to live in this town." Heads turned. The conversation stopped. "And I have a story I think you'll want to hear." From the back, I saw my mother's face, pale, still. Brandon looked confused. Emily was already moving, trying to get to the stage. Too late. I was disowned by the Sullivans 9 years ago. No call, no explanation. Just gone. But I didn't disappear. I built something. I succeeded. And when I started looking into my past, I discovered something. Fraud, tax evasion, identity theft, my identity, used by the very people who pretended I no longer existed. Gasps rippled through the tent. Phones came out. Cameras clicked. A murmur spread like wildfire. My father's clinic used my name for fake employees, for billing schemes, for years. And the documents don't lie. I have them all. And in 24 hours, so will the IRS, the state board, and every news outlet from here to DC. Emily reached the edge of the stage. "Karen, get down." I looked right at her, calm, measured. "No, Emily, I'm done staying quiet so you can play perfect." I handed the microphone back to the stunned bandleader and walked off stage without another word, because I didn't need to shout anymore. I was the storm now, and I had already landed. There's a strange silence after an explosion. It's not peace. It's the sound of people scrambling to make sense of the pieces. That's exactly what happened after the wedding. 1 minute, glasses were clinking, and photographers were lining up for posed portraits. Next, half the guests had their phones out, recording me, whispering my name like it was a curse suddenly remembered. By the time I reached my car, the videos were already online. I watched the first clip sitting in the driver's seat, hands still steady. The caption read, "Disowned daughter crashes sister's wedding with fraud accusations. Charleston elite in chaos." The view count ticked up by the second. It didn't take long for local reporters to latch on. I didn't have to send anything to the press. They came to me. I gave one interview, calm and measured. No theatrics, just facts, documentation, dates, signatures, bank records. My attorney released the forensic audit to the proper authorities. The reaction was swift. The Sullivan Family Medical Clinic went under state investigation within 72 hours. My father, Dr. Richard Sullivan, was suspended from practicing medicine pending a formal review. They found nearly $1.8 million in false billings under my name alone. Emily tried to deny it publicly. Brandon didn't say much at all. Not after his father, head of the state ethics board, had to recuse himself from the case due to a conflict of interest. That conflict was me. The media swarmed them for days. Photos from the wedding were picked apart online. People analyzed every facial expression, every reaction, every moment frozen in time. And I stayed silent, not because I was scared, but because I'd already said what needed to be said. Let the truth echo louder than I ever could. But the headlines were only part of the fallout. 3 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. "Karen?" The voice was soft, careful, familiar. It was my mother. "I saw the video," she said. We didn't know it went that far. If I had known..." I cut her off. "You didn't want to know." There was silence on the line. I didn't fill it. Then finally she spoke. "We thought you'd come back. One day. We kept waiting." That made me laugh, not out of humor, but disbelief. "You kicked me out, You left me with nothing, and then you used me. There's no we in this story, Mom, just me, surviving, while you watched from behind a curtain. More silence. Then, a shaky breath. What do you want? And there it was. Not an apology, not regret, just damage control. The Sullivan way. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. I don't want anything, I said. You already gave me everything I needed. Your silence taught me how to speak. Your betrayal taught me how to fight. And your erasure? I exhaled slowly. That taught me how to become. She didn't call again. Neither did Emily. A week passed, then two. The clinic shut its doors. Brandon's father issued a public statement distancing the Reynolds family from the Sullivans. Emily's marriage, all 3 weeks of it, ended in an annulment. And yet, it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like clarity. Because what I did wasn't about burning them down. It was about stepping into the fire they lit for me and walking out untouched. And I wasn't done yet. Using my story, I launched a campaign, Daughters Rewritten, focused on helping young women legally reclaim their stolen identities, rebuild credit, and fight back against familial financial abuse. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in. Girls who were silenced, forgotten, manipulated. I wasn't alone. I'd just been early. For every Karen Sullivan the world tried to erase, there were thousands more waiting to speak. And I was going to help them find their voices. 1 year later, I stood in front of a packed auditorium in New York, receiving a humanitarian award from the Women's Legal Defense Fund. The cameras flashed. Applause thundered. My name rang out, not as a warning, but as a reckoning. Not as the lost daughter, but as the one who came back. Have you ever looked in the mirror and finally seen yourself, not as who you were told to be, but as who you became? That moment came for me 1 year after the wedding. I stood in the foyer of my new home, not a house built on legacy or secrets, but one I built brick by brick, with no ghosts in the walls. And I saw her. Not the girl they abandoned, not the woman they tried to erase, but the storm that rose anyway. Everything I had done wasn't about vengeance. That's the part most people misunderstand. It was never about making them suffer. It was about making me whole. After the chaos faded, after the articles stopped printing and the headlines turned to something shinier, I had time to think, to feel, to breathe. And for the first time in nearly a decade, I let myself remember the girl I used to be. The one who cried herself to sleep in a stranger's apartment at 19. The one who sold everything she owned for a single suitcase and a one-way bus ticket. The one who stood in front of a cracked mirror in a cheap bathroom whispering, "You're going to survive this." I wanted to hold her. I wanted to tell her she wasn't crazy, dramatic, or broken. That she was becoming. That the pain wouldn't be permanent, but the power she built from it would be. That's the thing about abandonment. It makes you believe you are unlovable, until you start loving yourself enough to prove that wrong. My work with Daughters Rewritten exploded. It wasn't just a passion project anymore. It became a full-blown foundation. We partnered with attorneys, therapists, and financial experts. We hosted retreats, legal workshops, and community events across the country. We provided emergency housing, scholarship programs, and survivor-led mentorship. And I made sure the girls who came through our doors knew they weren't just clients. They were survivors, warriors, authors of their next chapters. One of them, Alana, 17, from Memphis, wrote me a letter after her case was won. It read, "You saved me without even knowing me. I thought being invisible was safer. But you taught me that speaking up doesn't make you weak. It makes you real." I keep that letter in my office drawer. On the hard days, I read it again. Because of her story, it was mine once too. Eventually, people started asking about reconciliation. Would you ever speak to your family again? Could you forgive them if they apologized? Don't you want to let it go? And I get it. We're taught to idolize forgiveness. But forgiveness without accountability isn't healing. It's performance. And I don't perform for anyone anymore. I didn't send anyone to prison. I didn't ruin their lives. I just told the truth, loudly, publicly, and without shame. What do they do with that truth? That's on them. The last time I saw Emily was on a random Tuesday afternoon, nearly 2 years after the wedding. I was leaving a meeting at a legal clinic when I passed her on the sidewalk. She was thinner, paler, still beautiful, but faded in a way I couldn't explain. She froze. Our eyes met, and she didn't have words for the first time in her life. I nodded, not out of anger, not even out of spite, just acknowledgement. She opened her mouth to speak, but I walked past her before she could. Because I didn't need closure. I was the closure. That night, I went home, poured a glass of wine, and sat by the window. The city lights shimmered, and somewhere below, life kept pulsing, unbothered by history, unaffected by bloodlines. And I felt it, peace. Not the kind you fake at family dinners or whisper about in therapy, the real kind, the kind that comes from taking back your narrative. My name is Karen Evelyn Sullivan. I am not a cautionary tale. I am not the black sheep. I am not your shame, your regret, or your forgotten daughter. I am the woman you tried to erase and failed. And this is just the beginning. Looking back, I realized the deepest revenge wasn't in exposing them. It was in choosing me. I learned that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, the kind that keeps you standing when everything around you tries to bury you. I used to think closure came from confrontation, from getting the apology, the explanation, the acknowledgement. But the truth is, closure comes from within. When you stop chasing validation from those who hurt you and start building a life so full, their absence no longer echoes. That was the lesson. I was never theirs to break. It was always mine to rebuild.